diplomatic relations. And for more on that, dig a little deeper, we've got former Canadian ambassador to China, Guy Saint-Jacques, joining us now. Mr. Saint-Jacques, thanks for your time today.
Good to be with you, Todd.
What do you think the outcome is going to be here now, the reaction from the Chinese to today's decision?
Well, I think we can expect a strong reaction. In terms of timing, this is not the best moment because, as you may know, the Chinese Parliament, the National People's Congress, is sitting right now. In fact, they are concluding their work tomorrow. Xi Jinping will want to appear as strong. We have been warned that there could be further measures that will be taken against Canada. I expect that they will announce now that Mr. Kovic and Mr. Spaver will go to trial, and then it will become very difficult to get them out of there, unfortunately, because China will say that rule of law applies there as well, and that we cannot ask them to intervene in the judiciary process. The other thing also that is hanging out there is that the federal government has not made a decision yet on whether we will allow Huawei to participate in 5G development in Canada. So this also could trigger further measures on the part of China.
It's remarkable, Mr. Saint-Jacques, when you think about sort of the layers that are going on here. You know, you have this one woman, but then you've got the two Michaels, you've got the relationship between Canada and China, you've got, of course, Xi Jinping, the president of China. You mentioned Huawei and their footprint in Canada and whether that will be allowed to continue or not. You're saying, though, we can expect retribution for this.
Yes, and also the Chinese will have come to the conclusion that the extradition process is going to drag on for years. You know, we already lost $4.5 billion in exports last year. Our exports are down 16% this year. I think that we have to brace ourselves for further measures, and that means that the Canadian government will have to look at its strategy, because here we are a year and a half going through this crisis with no progress with regard to the fate of our two hostages over there. And I think, you know, this begs for much firmer responses from the part of the Canadian government. Of course, we are stuck right now because we depend on them for supplies of medical equipment to fight the COVID-19 pandemic. But I think it's time for us to reassess our strategy.
Do you think Canada has been too soft on the Chinese, Mr. Saint-Jacques?
I think we have been too soft, and the Chinese have succeeded in getting what they wanted out of us. They have been able to muzzle our voice, because if you look at what the Canadian government has said on the situation in Xinjiang, or on the way that China has managed the pandemic, or what's happening in Hong Kong now, you know, very little has been said. And, you know, what is at stake here is fundamental values for Canada. And I've said this previously, the only language that China will respect is firmness. So I think that we are at the stage where we have to reassess our strategy and start to take our own measures.
So we've tried the nice guy approach. Maybe it's time for something else. I'm curious if I can tap into your expertise as an ambassador to China, into the viewpoint of the Chinese. Are they going to see this as Canada doing the bidding of the United States?
Well, this is what they have said from the outset. And in China, the Communist Party is above the law. Xi Jinping confirmed that last year. So they would expect the Prime Minister here to interfere in the legal process. And the fact that it has not been done probably will trigger other mentions by Beijing that we are doing the bidding of the U.S. But on that, I think it's just a matter to explain again once again to them that, you know, this is the way that rule of law operates, that the judiciary is separate from the political world, and that overall this is a victory for justice that we have seen with this decision today.
It's interesting you say that. So let me just ask you, you know, the idea that the justice system works very different in China than it does in Canada, and that for some in China, it's difficult to imagine that, in fact, the judicial system is independent from the political system, because it isn't in China. So they won't believe this idea that the judge was independent. They may think that political pressure was brought on her to decide to move ahead with the extradition process.
Well, you know, we went through that when we had the case of Kevin Garrett when I was there. And, you know, on one end, they were telling us once his trial started, you know, you cannot ask us to interfere in the judicial process. Don't you know, we are a country governed by rule of law. But at the same time, you know, now they are saying, you know what you have to do, you, Mr. Prime Minister, you phone and you get her out of there. So they are talking of both sides of their mouth. And for us, again, this is part of our values, and it's a question of being firm and underlining that we cannot compromise. And even if our exports were to go to zero, we won't return Mrs. Meng. You know, she will have to go through the whole extradition process.
Guy Saint-Jacques joining us from Montreal. He's a former ambassador representing Canada and China. Thank you so much for this. Appreciate it, Monsieur Saint-Jacques.
Thank you very much.